go. Okay, so we kind of left off here, right? And the nice thing is it's left off with my retopo mesh already selected. I'm already in edit mode, right? Just make sure the reference object's back to quad body. I find that usually it doesn't matter that much because the shrink wraps really already got that set up, but for me just being like, hey, let's be extra cautious, just make sure your reference object's set back to the quad body. But kind of we're set, right? Kind of just make sure that's all turned back on if we need to. Remember, object mode would give you a very different retopo interface because it's at that point, if you're in object mode, it's assuming you want to start a whole new retopo mesh and not kind of build into what already exists. So you really need to be in like an edit mode, right? Select the retopo mesh object and be in 1, 2, or 3, right? Because then once you're in edit mode, it's got the different interface and it's assuming, hey, you want to rebuild it with regular tools, maybe add B surfaces and stuff like that. So yeah, just keep that in mind. In this case, I'm going to start off with a little bit of just kind of reminding you guys about how that annotate brush works, right? Because we do have a larger area here that we could probably do some B surface stuff for, right? So remember, the annotate is right over here. It's the pencil. It's actually just a little bit above things like your add, the new add feature they added in Blender 2.92, which is cool. We kind of saw it with the eyeball. It's a pretty neat feature, actually. I like it. I use it. But it allows you to just kind of draw a primitive mesh anywhere on the surface, basically. It's kind of cool. And it's several different kinds of primitives and all that stuff. But a couple up from that is the one that looks like a pencil with a curve, right? Like you're drawing a green line. Or kind of tealish, right? It's kind of more of a teal green. But it's in the green spectrum. Greenish, yeah, like tealish color. So there it is. There's a quickie for it, though. Of course, D is annotate. And D actually toggles you through the different ones, right? Like, so if you hit D once, you get the line option. If you hit it again, you get the polygon option, which kind of lets you draw a curve out, but it's more like drawing a face, right? So you'll see that the polygon version is like this, where you just kind of click, and then you kind of left click, and you see how it kind of draws a zigzag line. So you might prefer that as your method for it, right? Hit enter, and you should be able to start a new one, right? And of course, if you hit D one more time, you get the red line, and that kind of looks like an eraser, right? The pencil's reversed, and you can just come in here and erase your curves, right? So of course you can get rid of curves. You could draw it more freehand. You could draw it as a line or even as a polygon. So annotate's pretty neat, right? It's a pretty cool little function and feature. Take advantage of it. In this case, you can see what we're doing here is we're just going to kind of come in here, just left-click drag to kind of draw a curve in here, right? And then we'll left-click, and you notice how the order does matter, right? You always want to start from the same direction. So if I started this curve up here, the next one I want to start from roughly the same area, right? Going kind of drawing in the same direction. But you also notice that I'm honestly making sure that I draw this one here because that's going to be the closest, and then I draw one next out and next out. So you don't want to just draw and like draw furthest out. So it's kind of, you do want to kind of draw outward, right, from where you want to connect it to. So I'll just do another one right here. There we go. Okay. And then, of course, what we can do is we can hit Q to go back to our selection or tweak tool. And 1 for vertex. In this case, I'm going to go to Alt-C to add a loop cut, all right, just to get him a little more there. And then, of course, middle mouse button will allow you to move tool, or W for move, middle mouse button to free move. And you notice it does kind of let you move this, and it sticks to the surface. Remember, you can move, rotate, and scale any of these geometries, and it'll still stick to the surface, right? And you saw we could still loop cut. So we can go back to Q for our regular selection tool. And then what I can do is I can select the vertex. And then I can go up to about, say, here and grab that vertex. Remember, select menu, select linked, right? Shortest path, right? Shortest path. That's always useful. I've got a quickie set up for it because that's really useful. But by selecting these vertices along a path, when you go to add B surface, it's going to actually create this mesh through here. Now, if you want, you can go to the B surfaces area here, right? And you see there's a follow. And what you can do is you can turn that up, and you see how it kind of just gives you a little more edge loops through here, right? So you might like that. You might just want to do it manually. But remember, there are actually options for your B surfaces, right? You just click on that little guy right there, and it brings them up. Usually you'll see it does get this kind of faceted, like it's shade flat, right? Recalculate Normals basically is just applying shade smooth to it, right? So sometimes you'll see that happens. You just hit Recalculate Normals. It's basically applying a shade smooth. But it's kind of neat that you can do that, right? You can draw the curve in, and you can even connect it to already existing stuff by selecting the vertices along that. The nice thing is I've done this a couple times, so as you start to watch the retopo videos, you'll see a lot of me repeating myself. Because these are useful, and it really is the same stuff. Of course, Q is for tweak, right? Or Q really to turn your selection tool on. And if you keep hitting Q, it toggles you through, and you can eventually find the tweak. I like tweak on by default most of the time. Because, I could do some modeling with some other tools, then I can come back and that's on. Now, in this case, you'll notice sometimes we get kind of a vertex that sticks or behaves weird, right? Shrink wrap usually does a great job. And in fact, shrink wrap does a much better job with things like loop cut, right? So when you're doing loop cuts, if you don't have shrink wrap on, it's not going to work that great. So I myself usually just turn the snap off, mostly because of loop cuts with shrink wrap. But sometimes when you do occasionally, you don't get it that often, but occasionally you get that vertex that's fighting you, right? Or edges fighting you. Turn on your snap tool, right? It's by default set to face because of everything we've done here. And you'll notice it actually behaves itself a lot better. So sometimes I do find myself going in here and turning on the snap to vertex snap tool for faces because it'll behave itself better. I found, though, that more often than not, this will do weird stuff on its own right, particularly with loop cuts. So I myself personally leave that off a lot of the time and just rely mostly on the shrink wrap, which like 85% of the time works great. But occasionally I do get that weird behavior, particularly when there's a lot of concave forms and shapes. It gets a little squirrely, right? And that's when I just go back to the magnet, turn it on. Remember, if you click on the one next to it, all your snap options are there. Blender has pretty good snap tools. They're pretty darn good. But face is kind of on by default. I do like switching to median instead of closest, but those are little preference things you can turn off or on. But that's just kind of a cool way to add that little bit in there, right? And then, of course, if we want to, we could loop cut, right, to add an extra loop in there. Because we do want to have enough geometry to bridge these. I could probably do another loop cut there. And then, of course, we can go to T, or 2, right, for edge mode, and Q. And I could easily just go in here and I could select this edge and this edge, right? Select link to shortest path. In this case, I've got a quickie set up for it, so I can go to Shift over here, Shift, quick key. Quick keys are great, right? And then, of course, right-click, bridge edge loops. I do have a quickie for that set up, of course, as well. And that starts to bridge that stuff together. Of course, tweak tool's still on, so if I want to go in here and do a little more shaping to adjust this, I can. You can switch one to vertex. And you see we're just slowly starting to kind of build this all up, though, to create kind of this cavity in here. So remember, annotate can be a great way to kind of draw large strips of edge loops following the contours. And then when you get to a little bit more of the precise connecting stuff, you'll find that you're going to tend to use the normal modeling tools like bridge and extrude and loop cut more, right? Just to kind of start to fill those things in, fill those gaps in. And that's kind of where we're at, right? Is we're just kind of trying to figure out, hey, how's this going to go there? How's that going to go here, right? We can see in this case that we look like we actually are just about where we need to be with this. In fact, these look like these will go together properly. So I can go to 2 for edge, and I could select these 3 edges here and these 3 edges here, right? Right-click, bridge edge loops. There we go. And then we can just do an Alt-C for loop cut to put that in there. And hit Q to go back to your tweak tool. Remember, turn on auto merge, so that way you can kind of come in here to vertex mode and you can kind of just drag this vertex there. And usually it'll work pretty well about when you get close to another vertex merging, particularly if you turn the threshold up to max. The problem with that, though, is if you get close enough to something else, it'll do that merge. So that's why I kind of usually leave auto merge off, right? But auto merge can be useful. And now you see those are all connected up, right? So as we go through here and figure this out, we can slowly kind of build up what we need, right? Slowly connect all the pieces where we want them to be at. Yeah, so it's kind of pretty neat and pretty interesting that way. One of the things you're going to start to see that we need to work with is probably start to bring some of these in here a little bit. So I'm going to go to 2 for edge, grab these 2 edges. Remember, extrude works with these tools as well. Control E, right? Middle mouse button. And then I can hit E for rotate, middle mouse button to rotate this. Then we can do Control E, middle mouse button, right? We can even hit W for regular move. And if you want, like we said, turn snap on, and you might find that that works a little bit better, right? Shrink wrap works great most of the time, but occasionally it gets weird. So you just sometimes go up here and just toggle on your snap tools. And you see that can kind of work a little bit better. And then, of course, I can go back to 1, Q for the tweak tool, and we can just do some minor tweaks here. So don't be afraid to necessarily turn on the snap if you need it. Occasionally, you will need that snap to face. And these are just some of the little tricks I've learned over the last several months to kind of get this thing working quite well for me, right? I'll probably turn it off now for at least a moment. 2 for edges. I could grab these 2 edges, bridge, right? And you still, we can slowly start to kind of connect all of these things up for ourselves, right? So it's that slow process of just saying, okay, I'm going to tweak that a little bit, I'm going to tweak that a little bit, tweak this a little bit. Probably need a loop cut through here, so Alt-C to loop cut. And then, of course, we can go right back in here and maybe bridge those. Then maybe Alt-C for loop cut just to put an edge loop there. And then, of course, we could double left click to select the whole edge loop. And then if we hold down Shift, you see how we could deselect those 2? So that way we have 2 to 2. In this case, I'll just use my Shift B quick key. Because once you have quick keys for some of these tools you use a lot, things go a lot faster than going through the menus, right? I use the menus more for when I don't usually use a tool a lot, right? When it's something I only use occasionally, I'm like, I don't need a quick key for that. I'll just right-click or I'll go to the menu to do it. But if it's a tool like extrude or loop cut or bridge or bevel, something that you're going to use often, many of those already have quick keys like Control B for bevel, Control E for extrude, Alt-C for loop cut. Bridge doesn't for whatever reason. It's kind of weird, but it's easy enough to just do Shift B, right, instead of Control B. But you see how you can kind of start to get these all thrown together and just start to fit the pieces together. Now, one of the things you can see here is that there's more polygons on this face area right there than there is in the nose. And you notice the nose is a bit blocky here and a bit blocky there. So really, we could probably end up using a bit more in terms of edge loops here. So Alt-C for loop cut, and we can just throw an edge loop in there and in there. And you see how it does a pretty good job of conforming to the surface. If need be, we can always, slide, right? Right-click, edge slide. And you'll see that sliding edges actually does a pretty good job of obeying the shrink wrap also. So if there's a few areas where you just want to not move them, but just slide them, right? Right-click, edge slide when you're in edge mode, you could do that, right? Double left, select an edge loop, edge slide. But you see how we've got a lot more of this roundness in here? Remember, 5 will take you to sculpting, right? And we like that grab tool in sculpting, and I could move these around a little bit. I could hit Shift to soften and smooth them out. And you see how even just stuff like this, where I can come in here and I can just use my grab tool, can allow me to go in here and move some of these forms around a bit more, a little quicker. And then we could soften them out a little bit to get a more even distribution of stuff, right? So remember, we have many of these cool functions that will allow us to kind of move some of this stuff along a little bit. And then Shift for smooth a little bit, right? And you see how you can kind of... So it's still sticking to the surface quite well, but it's kind of a little bit more or less bunched up, right? You always want it to be a little more uniformly distributed. Try not to have edge loops bunch up too much if you can. Sometimes you do have that because you want more geometry in a face because you want that to animate more. But you see how just hitting 5 for sculpting gives us that cool feature, right? It's that cool option. Of course, we can go back to, like say, 2 for edges. But those extra edge loops were useful because we could use it to define the curvature here a little bit better. This looks a lot more rounded and natural now. And you'll also see there's just more to connect to the mouth area now. So you see how we can kind of come in here and say, grab that edge, grab that one, shortest path, and then we can kind of find the 3 that are closest to that there, shortest path. Remember, I'm just using the quick key, but select linked has shortest path. And then, of course, right-click, bridge edge loops, right? And then, of course, if we want, we need more edge loops here, so we can do some Alt-C for loop cut here. And we start to get a couple of edge loops in here. That will allow us to start to bridge and connect all these things together. Probably get one more right in there. And of course, we can hit Q for our selection tool. W for move if we want to move these up a little bit. Or we could slide, kind of up to you on how you want to approach that. But you see how now we're getting this built together, and it's got that nice curvature. Q for, remember, Q is your quick key for your regular selection. And you'll now notice I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there. So sometimes when I've got a lot, instead of doing shortest path, right, I'll do a double left click, right, because double left click selects edge loops. And I know that I just want to deselect these guys right here. So holding down Shift when you're in the tweak tool, usually it's Control. If you want to deselect an edge loop, if you want to deselect while you're in circle select, Control, right? Control is a lot more often in Blender your deselect. However, Shift, when you're in the tweak tool, Shift is actually going to add and subtract the selections. So if you hold down Shift, you deselect those. And then, of course, right-click, bridge edge loops. And it automatically welds those corners there. So those are welded together. I can hit 5 to bring up the grab tool, maybe Shift for smooth, right? Remember, in sculpting, Shift is automatically your smooth, and that's actually pretty universal. Mudbox would do that. ZBrush would do that. So most packages that have some sculpting features, you're likely going to find Shift is smooth. And you see I can just kind of soften some areas up a little bit. And then I could always, go back to, like, say, 1 for vertices. And if I need to, I could always do a bit of manual tweaking, right? That grab tool and smooth is awesome, but occasionally it will start to push the shape in weird directions. But you can see it's useful for kind of massaging that shape a little bit, and then maybe we do a little bit of manual tweaking. But once again, I'm not doing anything new. This is all stuff that we were doing the last couple of videos, right? It's the same stuff. It's annotate to draw some curves, adding some B surfaces. All of the rest of this is modeling tools we've actually used plenty, like extrude, bridge, and loop cut. It's just that they're now being used in conjunction with shrink wrap. So that they stick to the surface, basically, right? And this is how retopologism works, right? You see how we're still building these edge loops and they're following the contour of the form? And that's why sometimes you just need to come in and do some retopologizing, right? Because there are times when some forms aren't easy to box model, and it just ends up being easier to come in and say, hey, we're going to just, retop of those. I think we'll kind of fix up that nose a little later on. I'm looking here, and I feel like we should probably try to finish this up. And we're almost there, right, to kind of finish this section up. So if I hit 2, I can go to edge mode, and I can move these edges down a little bit, right, just to kind of have them a little less bunched up. And honestly, when I'm looking here, I see that this is not going to have enough edges to connect to here. So I could easily probably have a loop cut through here. So you always kind of look and see, hey, this looks simpler than here. So if I add a little edge loop here, not only, and see how this section right here looks a little simpler than that one. So that's where you just kind of say, hey, these 3 edges should probably come to these 3 edges, but I only have 2 there. Just like when I look here, I've kind of got 2 edges to 3 there. So Alt-C for loop cut. I'm just going to put an edge loop in there. This is where this gets a little trickier, guys, right? But this is also the kind of stuff that you will see professional modelers, myself included, using, right? I approach it a bit differently. Some people will just ZBrush this, Dynamesh this, and remember, Blender kind of has that functionality as well, and rely on automated retopologizing. And automated retopologizing is just, it's real hit or miss. I find that it's just not that great. It's not terribly reliable. It might give you some usable stuff, but then certain parts are just not that usable. And so you often still have to get in there and do a lot of manual retopo. I personally don't want to manually retopo a whole creature. I personally don't really want to rely on automated retopologizing. So for me, I was like, hey, I've got a great, fast, easy box modeling method that works great for most of the parts I need. And so what I do is I box model, because I can get that done really quickly. And then I say, okay, now let's take a sculpt pass, and then we just rebuild what we want. And that way, we're still able to just define weird forms, right, that aren't easier to box model. And we rely on our retopo to build those sections. But we still have so much of the model that's already good for us that we don't have to rely on automated tools for or manually doing, right? So I've just kind of settled on this like hybrid method just because I feel like I get the best of everything and can get to the final result that I want quicker and easier. So now I can come in here and I can just grab these 3 edges and these 3 edges, and we can just, you know, bridge. There we go. And I'm just going to add a loop cut here, right? Because that'll add through here. And then, of course, we can go back to Q, turn on our auto merge really quickly, go to 1 for vertex, and we just auto weld that vertex. Turn it off. And there we go. Maybe 5 to do a little bit of shift smooth here. And you see how just hitting 5 for sculpt to be able to do a little bit of grabbing and then shift for smoothing is super, super cool, right? Makes it really easy to massage some of these shapes a little bit more without having to tweak every little vertex. Obviously, you could use tweak. So if we go back to 1 with proportional, but the grab is giving the same thing, and you get the smooth feature, right? You get shift for smoothing. So, but now you see how that's actually kind of finished up, right? We've now got that nice little bit of finished up section there. And then we can even come in here and do a little bit here. I think I'm only going to do 2 here because this will probably end up connecting to that. But we can just do right-click bridge edge loops, a quick loop cut, W for move. And the thing is, you could turn auto merge on right now, and then hit W for move, and you see it'll auto merge that. So it actually is pretty good about auto merging vertices that are really close to each other. I do find the threshold sometimes is a little too low, so I turn it at max. But then I just turn it off most of the time because I don't really want auto merging most of the time. So these are just some of the little workflow things that I've worked out with Speed Retopo. You see how this is slowly coming together, right? And it's actually slower than it should be because I'm teaching it, right? And explaining it and taking time to talk about theory a little bit with it sometimes. As you get better with these techniques, it's even faster and easier, right? You'll get it done quicker. You can do something a little more complicated. But this is how retopologizing works, right? It can be used for gear and armor, but also it can be used to rebuild parts of characters that aren't terribly easy to box model. So for me, this is the way I kind of use everything, right? A bit of sculpting of the primary forms, a lot of box modeling of the primary forms, some retopologizing to build gear and armor, but also to rebuild the parts of the characters that I didn't want to box model. And you see Blender stock, but even with just a few free add-ons is pretty amazing. All right, I think that'll be a great place to stop this. So we'll stop the video.